friend.
You don't have any friends.
Shalom Aleichem. My name is Rabbi Joey, and you've reached the Yoke of Messiah YouTube channel. Thank you so much for visiting with us. This week we're doing a Midrash on the Parsha of Tzav, and this is the week leading up to Pesach, and so we're all very, very excited to have you with us. Of course, it's year 2021. Before we get started, we'll go ahead and do the blessing over the Torah reading. So if you know it at home, please sing along. Baruchu Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bar karbanu mikol ha'amim v'natalanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten ha'torah. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Bless the Lord who is to be blessed.
Bless the Lord who is blessed forever and ever.
Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who gave to us the Torah of truth and life everlasting, planted in our midst. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. And again, thank you all so much for visiting and joining with us this week. Again, Parsha Tzav, that starts in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1. If we typically go by the aliyahs as they're laid out on kabbalah.org. And if anybody would like to read the first one, we are certainly opening the floor to that. Whomever may like to lead off.
I'll do it if you want me to.
All right, Becky, that sounds like a good plan to me.
It's a short one. Leviticus 6. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. This is the burnt offering which burns on the altar all night until morning, and the fire of the altar shall burn with it. And the Cohen shall don his linen tunic, and he shall don his linen trousers on his flesh. And he shall lift out the ashes into which the fire has consumed the burnt offering upon the altar, and put them down next to the altar. He shall then take off his garments and put on other garments, and he shall take out the ashes to a clean place outside the camp. And the fire on the altar shall burn on it. It shall not go out. The Cohen shall kindle wood upon it every morning, and upon it he shall arrange the burnt offering and cause the fats of the peace offerings to go up in smoke upon it. A continuous fire shall burn upon the altar. It shall not go out. This is the law of the meal offering, that Aaron's sons shall bring it before the Lord to the front of the altar. And he shall lift out of it in his fist from the fine flour of the meal offering, and from its oil and all the frankincense that is on the meal offering, and he shall cause its reminder to go up in smoke on the altar as a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. And Aaron and his sons shall eat whatever is left over from it. It shall be eaten as unleavened bread in a holy place. He shall eat it in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. It shall not be baked leavened. As this portion, I have given it to them from my fire offerings. It is a holy of holies, like the sin offering and like the guilt offering. Any male among Aaron's sons may eat it. This is an eternal statute for your generations from the fire offerings of the Lord. Anything that touches them shall become holy.
Honestly, the only real thought I had about any of that is just always when we see in these parshas in the last few weeks, and this one as well, there at the very end, where it talks about anything that touches them shall become holy. It always reminds me of the woman with the issue of blood, that when she reached out and touched Mashiach Yeshua, Jesus, that not necessarily was she made holy, but she was made whole. So.
Oh, that's good, Joey. She was made whole.
This this one part here in verse 4 always kind of reminds me of the red heifer, where he says he shall take off his garments, put on other garments, and shall take out the ashes to a clean place outside the camp. Is it understood that as the ashes build up over the course of time, they just always do this, or in regular course would do this? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Also, another question. We know that it is forbidden to eat blood, as it is, which we'll say in this parsha as well. And we know it is forbidden to eat fat, but animals, specifically all animals in their meat that is okay and kosher to eat, even kosher animals, there is some marbling of fat in their meat. I'm wondering if he means specifically the fat of the long lobe of the kidney that's referred to here specifically, that is not allowed to be eaten, because all animals, even milk for the vegetarians among us, has fat content in it. So I was just thinking about that today as I was going through these alia, that is the fat of the offering specific to what God forbids us to eat, or is it as much fat as we can take out of the process as possible? If anybody has any thoughts on that.
What does Rashi have to say about that? Let's look.
Somebody's going to have to look up Rashi, because Safari just dropped a Ramban today. So I'm going to be totally absorbed with that for the next while. Been waiting for that to come out. It wasn't in English before, so they just dropped all the English of Rashban.
That's a very good app. It's a very good app for people who don't know it. Safari, go and check that out.
They have pretty much every Jewish text ever, and most of them are in English by now. Most of the commentaries are either done or in progress, and I'm a little jealous they're not totally done with the Jerusalem Talmud yet, and I'm only salty because that's the one I'm reading right now, but it's fine. I've got an English translation. It's just not online like fancy people.
I want it in my phone, in my pocket.
Right. I don't want to carry a 37 volume of the Talmud.
Right.
I want to carry it in my pocket.
Right. Let's see. So in here, in this particular parsha, I don't believe they refer to the forbiddenness of eating fat. I know later in this parsha, it does talk about the forbiddenness of eating blood. So I will have to go back and do some homework on that and come back for that. Let's see. Wow, Google is just taking liberties. Chelev, the two pieces of flank, the left one covered with a sheet of real chelev, the right one only has some non-kosher tendons, krumim. Chelev, or what it is known as suet, S-U-E-T. I'm not familiar with that word.
Suet. Suet is.
Suet.
I guess it's fat.
Is the animal fats that the Torah prohibits specifically.
The only reason I know that is my mother used to cut all the suet off. She'd give it to the birds.
So what part of the fat is that? I know it's telling us here, but I don't really know from, is that just like the big fat chunks that are on the edges?
I thought it was on the outside of the meat, but don't quote me. I thought it always looked like it had a rind on it. I think it was the outside of the meat.
Right. I think I know what you're talking about. Like you see that in like old timey pictures of steaks. It's like a T-bone steak and it has like the white layer on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Don't they have suet things that you can hang out for the birds? It's
and she would just she would cut off that and give it and hang it out, put it out for the birds.
Suet, according to the Googles, is the raw hard fat of beef or mutton that's found around the loins and kidneys.
Okay.
It has a very high smoke point, so it makes it ideal for frying and pastry production.
Well, alrighty then.
Yeah.
I'll put me a piece in my next donut batch.
So I think essentially it's around the kidneys, mostly of cows.
You know, my mother was.
Lobe of the kidney is always.
She'd take apart anything, so no telling.
Let's see.
But whenever I see this scripture or any scriptures like this about the high priests, they're changing their garments and everything, I'm just, I can't make a theory out of it, but I'm just always reminded of how, the Messiah, took off his royal garments to put on his garments of flesh,
Right.
And to do what he had to do for us, or what he chose to do for us, and so whenever I see a high priest going, changing back and forth, that's what I'm reminded of.
Right. Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at my son who is humming in the background.
Oh,
I'm
can you
surprised
hear
you
him?
can't hear one of my cats
It's-
howling in the
No
background.
humming.
He's fine. It's not troubling to me anyways, but I'm used to it.
Well, we're so used to it now.
Yeah. It's just like the constant drip in the background that you just get used to.
Right.
Well, and this one gets started, and like in unison, hum together, the same tune, all day.
Would anybody like to read Alia 2? I will read it then. Let's see. Turn off the commentary so it's a little easier to read.
Cut
Tell
it
me
off.
the what.
All right, starts in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 12. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This is the offering of Aaron and his sons, which they shall offer to the Lord on the day when one of them is anointed. 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a perpetual meal offering, half of it in the morning, half of it in the evening. It shall be made with oil on a shallow pan. After bringing it scalded and repeatedly baked, you shall offer a meal offering of broken pieces with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. And the Cohen who is anointed instead of him from among his sons shall prepare it. This is an eternal statute. It shall be completely burnt to the Lord. Every meal offering of a Cohen shall be completely burnt. It shall not be eaten. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and to his sons, saying, This is the law of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be slaughtered before the Lord in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is a holy of holies. And the Cohen who offers it up as a sin offering shall eat it. It shall be eaten in a holy place, in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy. And if any of its blood is sprinkled on a garment, the area of the garment upon which has been sprinkled you shall wash in a holy place. An earthenware vessel in which it is cooked shall be broken, but it is cooked in a copper vessel, it shall be purged and rinsed with water. Every male among the Kohanim may eat it. It is a holy of holies. But any sin offering, some of whose blood was brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy, shall not be eaten. It shall be burned in fire. Leviticus chapter 7, verse 1. And this is the law of the guilt offering. It is a holy of holies. They shall slaughter the guilt offering in the place where they slaughter the burnt offering. Its blood shall be dashed upon the altar around, and all of its fat he shall offer from it, the tail and the fat covering its innards, the two kidneys, and along with the fat that is upon them, which is on the flanks. There's our suet reference. And the diaphragm with the liver, along with the kidneys, he shall remove it. And the Cohen shall cause them to go up in smoke on the altar as fire offering to the Lord. It is a guilt offering. Any male from among the Kohanim may eat it. It shall be eaten in a holy place. It is a holy of holies. Like the sin offering, so is the guilt offering. They have one law. The Kohen who effects atonement through it, to him shall belong. And the Kohen who offers up a person's burnt offering, the skin of the burnt offering which he has offered up belongs to the Kohen. It shall be his. And any meal offering baked in an oven, and any one made in a deep pan or shallow pan, belongs to the Kohen who offers it up. It shall be his. And any meal offering mixed with oil or dry shall belong to the sons of Aaron, one like the other. not to be too evangelistic, but I did not catch this until just now. In verse 21, I've always wondered this, and I don't know if it's not an allusion to the Messiah. An earthenware vessel, which, would be like clay, which is just found right on the surface of the earth. You don't have to go looking for clay, it's right there, in which this offering is offered, or baked, or cooked, or as it were, shall be broken. But if it is cooked in a copper vessel, which you have to go into the earth to find, shall be purged and rinsed with water. So maybe this is a reference to Mashiach, that his earthen vessel was broken, but his vessel, when he came from out of the earth, was like copper, in which it could not be broken, and it would be just for the rinsing and the purging with water, etc., etc. I don't know. Maybe evangelistic, but it seemed to stand out to me as we were reading it just now.
Wait till you get to the part where it's talking about flesh left till the third day.
Right.
Dun, dun.
Let's see if Rashi has anything to say about verse 21. An earthenware vessel in which it is cooked shall be broken, because the absorption that had been absorbed in the vessel becomes literally left over. The food remains within the vessel's walls. And subsequently, when the time limit for eating the sacrifice was expired, the absorption into the vessel wall is one of the leftovers at that point and must be destroyed by burning. Interesting. The food in the wall of this earthenware vessel must be destroyed by breaking the vessel. The same law of breaking the earthenware vessel in which meat of a sacrifice has been cooked applies to all holy sacrifices, not just a sin offering, which is true. Anytime something is cooked in an earthenware vessel, it has to be broken. And
Also,
then it is to
do
be
you know
purged.
about the rules for koshering your kitchen for Passover?
Nope.
Just offhand? Okay,
Please bring them
so
on.
there's 3 categories of dishes and cookware that you can theoretically kosher for Pesach. The one that requires the least amount of effort is glass. So if you're in an Orthodox home, it is very likely you will see a lot of glass plates and cookware and so forth, because it's not porous at all. So you run that thing through some boiling water or a really, really hot dish cycle, good to go. The ceramics take a little more work. You got to make sure those are really clean and hot. You have to really use boiling water to kosher them properly. The things that you don't really kosher are anything that's more porous than that. So, God, I left my notes upstairs. I have a giant notebook with all of my stuff for the koshering, but essentially the things that are more porous, like clay, you're just not gonna kosher them at all. You just got to get rid of it at that point. So things that are made of wood also are very porous, so you're not going to be able to kosher that stuff if you decide to do that. So you got to go with things that are either very little porous or not porous at all, like glass. So it's not a surprise, because clay and wood, they absorb liquids and fluids, so you can't really do anything with that. So
I would imagine plastics would be of the same category as the latter.
Yeah, I think some plastics, it depends, but obviously speak to your rabbi, because I know, like, if you use a cutting board, it gets little grooves in it, and it's hard to get bacteria out of that after a while if you use a plastic cutting board. So you kind of have to watch your cutting boards after a while, like if it's wood especially, but if it's plastic, you cut into it over and over and over, and those little grooves wear down, and you have to really pay attention to this stuff that builds up in that.
Well, that's just good for being clean.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So in verse 22, it says, and it was said something similar in the previous Aliyah, every male among the Kohanim may eat it. It is a holy of holies. My assumption, it means that not just the male priest, but like even their sons, I'm assuming, would be okay to eat this meal. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Metal, that's the one category I blanked. Metal, ceramic, and glass. Anyway, proceed.
But yeah, I was wondering if like their male sons, who would eventually become Levites and Kohanim may eat Holy of Holies foods, or is it only those who've actually been through the appropriate training?
Is that verse 18?
22.
22,
It
okay.
was also referred to in the previous Aliyah as well.
Okay. I'm just checking real quick. 22, if you read it clunky word for word in the Hebrew, and the Cohen who is anointed, so Kohen HaMashiach, in his place from among his sons shall offer it as a statute to Adonai forever. It shall be burned up wholly or entirely. So the grammar seems to be the priest who's anointed from among the sons of Aaron.
All right.
But I mean, they didn't own any property, and a lot of their food was given by the congregation or the assembly, so it would make sense for that. I'm also going to cross-reference.
Also, if they live far away from the temple, ultimately, what would be done at the temple instead of the Mishkan, it might be an issue where, I mean, if you have to travel with it, does this stuff travel well? Would your whole family have to be there? And we know that Cohens typically are serving in shifts, and they would probably be away from their families to some degree. So I don't know that it wouldn't just.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead and finish.
I was just going to say, I would assume it would be maybe just every Cohen present.
For that verse, Ibn Ezra says, only every male may eat the sin offering because it is the most holy. Only an unblemished person is fit to eat it, which has been brought to secure atonement and from which a portion has been sacrificed. I'm going to skip the next sentence because, anyway, even a minor is called a male, but in the current context, our ancestors have determined that this particular term denotes someone at least 13. So he's saying that the guys who can eat it are at least bar mitzvah age.
That's it.
All right. Did anybody have any thoughts about Aliyah 2 before we go to Aliyah 3?
Back in the Talmud. I have really learned how to develop my speed reading over the last few months.
I have to admit, I did speed read the last couple of Aliyahs of this today. I was in between CPR courses at work, so I was like speeding through it.
I tend to be very late on the weekly Parsha, so it's, for some reason, it's a struggle to get me to read it before Shabbat.
Right. I can usually get Sunday, Monday, Tuesdays readings, but then I have to, like, for purposes of this Midrash, typically I'll have to, I try and read it with wholeness and sincerity, but a lot of times I have to just skim it.
I'll catch it next year.
Right.
Well, we read it every year.
So, anybody want to do read Aliyah 3?
I'll do it if you want.
Okay.
And this is the law of the peace offering which he shall bring to the Lord. If he is bringing it as a thanksgiving offering, he shall offer along with the thanksgiving offering unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and scalded flour mixed with oil. Along with loaves of leavened bread, he shall bring his offering along with his thanksgiving peace offering. And he shall bring from it one out of each offering as a separation for the Lord. The Cohen who dashes the blood of the peace offering, it shall be his. And the flesh of his thanksgiving peace offering shall be eaten on the day it is offered up. He shall not leave any of it over until morning. But if his sacrifice is a vow or a voluntary donation on the day he offers up his sacrifice, it may be eaten, and on the next day, whatever is left over it may be eaten. However, whatever is left over from the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day shall be burnt in fire. And if any of the peace offering is to be eaten on the third day, it shall not be accepted. It shall not count for the one who offers it. Rather, it shall be rejected, and the person who eats of it shall bear his sin. And the flesh that touches anything unclean shall not be eaten. it shall be burned in fire. But regarding the flesh, anyone who is clean may eat the flesh. A person who eats the flesh of a peace offering of the Lord, while his uncleanness is upon him, that soul shall be cut off from its people. And a person who touches anything unclean, whether unclean is from a human or an unclean animal, which is a carcass, or any unclean carcass of an abominable creature, and then eats of the flesh of a peace offering to the Lord, that soul shall be cut off from his people. And the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, You shall not eat any fat of an ox, sheep, or goat, the fat of carrion and the fat of an animal with a fatal disease or injury may be used for any work, but you shall not eat it. For anyone who eats fat of animals from which sacrifices are brought as fire offerings to the Lord, the soul who eats it shall be cut off from his people. And you shall not eat any blood in any of your dwelling places, whether from birds or animals. Any person who eats any blood, that soul shall be cut off from his people. And the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, Anyone who brings his peace offering to the Lord shall bring a sacrifice to the Lord from his peace offering. His own hand shall bring the fire offerings to the Lord. The fat on the breast, he shall bring it, and the breast to wave it as a waving before the Lord. And the Cohen shall cause the fat to go up in smoke on the altar, and the breast shall belong to Aaron and his sons. And you shall give the right thigh as an elevation offering to the Cohen from your peace offering. Any one of the sons of Aaron who offers up the blood of the peace offering and the fat, he shall have the right thigh as a portion. For I have taken the breast of the waving and the thigh of the elevation for the children of Israel from their peace offerings, and I have given them to Aaron the Cohen and to his sons as an eternal statute from the children of Israel. This is the grant for Aaron's atonement and his son's anointment from the fire offerings of the Lord on the day that he brought them near to be a Kohanim for the Lord, which the Lord commanded to give them on the day he anointed them from the children of Israel. This is an eternal statute for their generations. This is the law for the burnt offering, for the meal offering, for the sin offering, and for the guilt offering, and for the investitures, and for the peace offering, which the Lord commanded Moses on the Mount Sinai on the day he commanded the children of Israel to offer up their sacrifices to the Lord in the Sinai desert.
I know some reference was talked about in regards to in a previous aliyah about verses 17 and 18 of this aliyah regarding the third day. If anybody wants to expound upon that, I think. Excuse me. Pole climbing's got me tired. But Deidre, you had mentioned something in the previous aliyah about the third day here. Did you want to expound upon that? Speak on this?
Let me scroll back up. Make sure that I got the
Verse
right
17
word.
and 18.
Yeah. Going on a rabbi trail, Ramban actually disagrees with Rashi on how long you have to eat this particular offering. The commentary at the time was that you had that day and maybe the second day. Maybe. Ramban is saying you got to eat whatever you can on the first day. If it happens to be left over on the second, finish it off. But if by chance there's something left on day 3, you have to consume it. He goes off on a tangent about that and brings in some grammar stuff. But I did think it was interesting that we see a pattern of day 3, day 3, day 3, day 3, throughout the Tanakh. And it's usually given as a sign for something, or it's used as a pattern for something. And I know Tony Robinson takes that to kind of point towards Mashiach. Some other people take it to point to like resurrection. There's other interpretations, but if you take this particular reference to be something in that, I guess, vein, not to use a terrible pun, but we are told that Yeshua was in the earth for 3 days and he rose on the third day. So there might be a parallel of, his bones weren't broken and he was put in the earth. And in terms of his work being done, he didn't have to wait days and days for it to be done. He pretty much got what he needed to do done so that the resurrection, we're told, happened on the third day. So there could be another midrash here. I just haven't spent the time to flesh it out.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Yes.
But I did notice that earlier when we were talking, Becky, about the suet, it has a very high smoking temperature. So it's interesting that that's offered up for one of the guilt offerings because, fire is usually considered a type of judgment, and guilt is something that would require a lot of heat, I guess.
Right.
So I guess in a spiritual sense, you would say that there's maybe a harsher judgment for that than there would be for other things that don't burn as hot. Because I'm not going to say like, oh yeah, there's super like light sins and then there's like really bad ones, like they're all bad. But, there's sins that you would consider maybe not as egregious. So, what was the one about the bird, the eggs with the nest? You can take.
And you have to shoo the mother bird off the nest before you take the eggs.
That is important. We were given that mitzvah for a reason. We're not always told why, but you wouldn't necessarily consider that as egregious as, slaying the life of another human.
Right.
So they're both important. We're both told what to do, what not to do, but you may not have the same guilt about a bird's eggs than you would about a human.
Right.
So.
Right.
And of course, all sins are bad because sins are, they place distance, or maybe not distance, but a barrier between us and our relationship with God and Him. But at the same time, there are definitely, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there are categories, of sin because we see different payments. I mean, not eating kosher is a sin, but
there's not penalties for some of these mitzvot. Right. There's some where it's like, you're cut off. There's other ones where it just tells you not to do it, but it doesn't list any kind of judgment for it.
Right.
So.
Like if you steal a thing, you have to replace it with 20% on top. If you steal a person, even if that person is recovered, you are executed. So there's definitely.
And then there are sins unto death.
Right.
There's nothing that can be. There's nothing that you can do.
Definitely sins.
Yeah.
Right. I want to say there's about 40 of them listed in the Torah. I can't remember. I made a list of them somewhere. I'll have to look them up again at some point.
Checking it out. Huh?
Don't want to do that, do you?
No, you need to commit those to memory for sure.
Even in the classes that I've been taking, they talk a lot about how there's two really broad categories where there's transgressions against God and then there's transgressions against your fellow man. Right. And, not to say that every single one fits into both of those, but if you're not directly sinning against a fellow man, there's the potential you might actually be sinning against God, Right. If he's the one that provides food for nature and you're acting against what he prescribed for nature and coexisting with it, you might not be injuring your fellow man, but you might be transgressing against God. So
right.
May have just debunked myself.
Right.
On verse 18, I just would like to get a clarification. at the end of it, that verse, it says, it shall be rejected, and the person who eats of it shall bear his sin. What do we think bear his sin means?
I was wondering that, and it's kind of a weird thing to me because the way it reads, it seems like it could be either that he bears his sin, and his sin was eating a sacrificial animal's meat on the third day. Or if we know God is a God who visits the iniquity of parents onto children from generation to generation, that for those who do not love and obey him, that does that mean that whatever sin that animal was originally sacrificed for, the person who offered the sacrifice is forgiven, but the person who illegally eats the meat on the third day, does the guilt of the original sin for which the animal was slaughtered slide down to him, and now he must perform the same offering as though he had committed the original sin that was necessitating this offering to begin with?
Some of the commentaries are discussing that the person that this is speaking of specifically had the intention before the Kohen did his part that he was going to already eat it on the third day. So it's not that they're retroactively making it not acceptable. It's that they're implying that someone went in with bad intentions and was like, oh, I know it's only supposed to be like the first day and maybe the second, but I'm going to eat it on the third day. So
Right.
it was their heart going in that was off.
Right. That could certainly, there's absolute applicability to that. God, and there's scriptural reference for it. I'm drawing blank on it right now, but there's evidence to say that if your intention is to do the right thing and you fail to do it, that God looks on that more favorably than doing the right thing without the intention of the heart being correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he says, you honor me with your mouth, but your heart is far from me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going through the motions, but you're not really there.
Right.
Trying to scan and see if there's any other commentaries that pop out.
Who's making the peace offering? One of the Cohen? Who's making the peace offering?
Well, once the animal has been slaughtered, I think the Cohen's job is the rest of it. Like the person brings it to the tent of meeting, he lays his hands on the animal's head. I've seen it said that there's either the person who's offering the animal slaughters the animal, or the Cohen slaughters the animal as the hands are upon the head. I've seen it discussed both ways. But beyond that, the Cohen is gathering the blood, sprinkling it in the appropriate places, cutting out, and basically field dressing the animal for its intended purposes.
So is it then one of the Cohen that eats it on the third day?
Possibly.
Or is it Joe Blow?
Possibly, but I did go back after I asked that question and look back on this particular offering, and this is a vow or voluntary donation. So this is a sacrifice for the completion of a vow, or just they want to do it to do it. So it seems like, I think more people are allowed to, I think basically this is one of those that as long as you're ritually clean, then you may eat it, because verse 19 says, the flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten, shall burn in fire, but regarding its flesh, anyone who is clean may eat the flesh. So this seems more like a communal thing and not just the Kohens here. Though we know from history the Kohens are not, they absolutely can fall short of these,
Well, you guys go a whole lot deeper than I ever think of going. So I take this sort of at face value, and I was like, well, that whoever eats it bears the sin of the person that offered it.
Right.
Whatever that sin is.
Right.
It's a
Well,
peace
now that's
offering.
how I see it.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Because isn't the whole idea that you're offering something up to God? Like, we know he doesn't eat or have need of food, but it's the idea that you're trying to get something to him. So if you the Hebrew literally means to like carry the guilt. So whatever is, the bearing your guilt, it literally means to like take it or carry it. So whatever you were gonna send up to God, you break, procedure. It's like, well, you've got something accredited to you and you're gonna have to carry it. It's gonna weigh you down or burden you, not just like physically, obviously, but
And it also kind of clarifies the thing that was being said earlier, that if this is a vow of completion or a peace offering, as it were, that the person who eats it on the third day shall bear his sin. It sounds to me like the eating of it on the inappropriate day is the sin that he is bearing, because there was no sin for which this was sacrificed to begin with. Because it wasn't even a breaking of the vow, because the vow was completed, and this is what happens after.
Joey, there's a commentary from the Gemara, which is in the Talmud. The specific one is from the Babylonian Talmud that backs up what you were saying earlier. They're asking, frequently, why is so-and-so ruling this way? Why is so-and-so getting this teaching from this teacher? It's, they discuss how the intention to eat it beyond the designated time, it was the intention of the person that was making the whole thing moot. It says, if any of the flesh was, consumed on the third day, it says that this serves to tell you that just as your improper intention with regard to the consumption of a person, it renders the offering unfit, so too one's improper intention with regard to the consumption of the stuff that goes on the altar renders it unfit. So it seems to be like, oh, you did a free will vow, but you're going in and it's not, something's not right inside.
Right. And if it's the person offering it, then it's almost like Ananias and Sapphira. It's like they're giving an offering, but they're holding something back.
Yeah. Or you're offering strange fire, like the sons of Aaron did.
Right. Well, did anybody was there any more thoughts about Aliyah 3 before we move to 4? Not trying to rush us, just trying to see what else is out there. All right. Who would like to read Aliyah 4? Well, this Midrash is like Fight Club. If it's your first time, you have to read.
Do I have to chant it?
No,
I'm kidding.
Just regular.
I would only be able to chant like 0.1% of this from memory. I wouldn't be able to do it just off the cuff. Maybe one day. Okay. And Adonai spoke to Moshe, saying, take Aharon and his sons with him, and the garments, and the anointing oil, and the sin offering bowl, and the 2 rams, and the basket of matzah, and assemble the entire community at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Moshe did as the Lord had commanded him, and the community assembled at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Moshe said to the community, this is the thing that the Lord has commanded to do. And Moshe brought Aaron and his sons forward and bathed them in water. And he placed the tunic upon him, girded him with the sash, clothed him with the robe, placed the ephod upon him, girded him with the band of the ephod, and adorned him with it. And he placed the Hoshen upon him, and he inserted into the Hoshen the Urim and the Tumim. And he placed the cap on his head, and he placed on the cap towards his face the golden showplate, the holy crown, as the Lord had commanded Moshe. And Moshe took the anointing oil and anointed the sanctuary and everything in it and sanctified them. And he sprinkled from it upon the altar 7 times. And he anointed the altar and all its vessels and the washstand and its base to sanctify them. And he poured some of the anointing oil upon Aharon's head, and he anointed him to sanctify him. And Moshe brought Aharon's sons forward and clothed them with tunics, girded them with sashes, and bound them up with high hats, as the Lord had commanded Moshe.
Thank you. Between this Ollie and the next, what stood out to me, and has in the past, but I guess I kind of forgot about it, and I was reminded again reading it today, that Moses is a son of Levi, but he's actually doing all this stuff, and he's doing it without that it records any of the fancy pants or garments or whatever else. Like it's he is instituting all this and making a path. Uh, I just thought it was interesting that, all this trouble is being made for these outfits to get done and all this stuff and for all the things to be done. But Moses actually does it for the first time. Uh, in
Oh
what we
man,
have no record of being anything but his normal clothing.
I'm so glad that Safaria dropped this Ramban commentary today because this dude is sassy. I like him. I don't know if you guys don't really read through the Talmud, you don't really think about how much the rabbis disagree with each other. It's a lot.
Right.
They only resolve like 1% of all of the hundreds of thousands of dialogues and disagreements they have.
Right.
And Ramban, he quotes something that Rashi says and is saying, Rashi says that such and such happened on this particular day, and that there's not a strict chronological order of Torah narrative. And then Ramban goes, but why should we invert the words of the living God? And then he goes on to make his differing opinion about when these events happen specifically. So,
Right.
yeah, I just love it. People think it's a monolith. It's not. It's not.
Right.
Two rabbis, three opinions. I mean, it's a thing.
It's reading legal. It's like reading legal text. You have it's just like with the Supreme Court. You have the prevailing opinion, then you have all of the opinions of the people who disagreed with it. For some reason I'm drawing
Dissent.
blank on the dissenting opinions, and these are all recorded just as much as the
Yep.
as the prevailing. So.
And I used to find it tedious. And I was like, why are we reading all these hundreds of pages of people disagreeing with each other? Just pick one.
Right.
And then I realized there's not just one.
Right.
Anytime you read something, there's room to wiggle around. And the reason that they're discussing these topics is because they are trying to follow the mitzvah. They're
Right.
trying to understand it. They're not just arguing for the sake of arguing. So
Right.
there's profit in it. You're presented multiple viewpoints, and you kind of have to go with the one that makes the most sense to you at the time. So
Right.
it does take a while, but I've got a new perspective.
I go in cycles. Sometimes
Me
I
too.
get in there and read a lot of it and really get after it, and sometimes I do not. Honestly, the compression of time at this moment, I'm doing good to do that.
I mean, yeah, there's days where I'm like, man, I wish I could spend 12 hours in a yeshiva every day. And then there's other days where I'm like flipping the table, like, I'm going to be a Karaite.
Right. I've definitely gone through those cycles as well. Did anybody have any thoughts about Alia 4 before we move to Alia 5? There's certainly a lot in it. I kind of wanted to see what else Moses is going to do with his brothers and his nephews.
Your
Be
papa's
looking-
going to sleep. We probably need to move on.
He's
He's
praying.
been going to sleep since the
He's
second Alia, so I've
Right.
given up on that.
Are you praying, Glenn?
Yeah, amen.
Amen.
All right. Ben or Brian, would you like to read Alia 8? Alia 8. Alia 5, which is chapter 8 of Exodus.
This is bonus round,
Leviticus.
Alia.
I'm all over the board. Sorry, very sleepy.
And he brought the sin offering bull close, and Aaron and his sons leaned their hands forcefully upon the head of the sin offering bull. And he slaughtered it, and Moses took the blood, and he placed it on the horns of the altar around with his finger, and he purified the altar. And he poured the blood at the base of the altar, and sanctified it, the altar, to effect atonement upon it. And he took all the fat which was on the innards, and the diaphragm with the liver and the two kidneys together with their fat, and Moses caused them to go up in smoke on the altar. And the bull, its hide, its flesh, and its waste, he burned with fire outside the camp, as Yahweh commanded Moses. And he brought near, I'm sorry, I gotta scroll. And he brought near the burnt offering ram, and Aaron and his sons leaned their hands forcefully upon the head of the ram, and he slaughtered it. And Moses dashed the blood on the altar around. And he cut up the ram into pieces, and Moses made the head, the pieces, and the fat go up in smoke. But the innards and the legs he washed in water, and Moses made the entire ram go up in smoke on the altar. It was a burnt offering with a pleasing fragrance, a fire offering to Yahweh as Yahweh commanded Moses. Oh, that was short.
Yeah. And again, Moses is doing all this stuff, which is just astounding to me. That I don't know why. It just always strikes me as very interesting that Moses is the one going out here and making this part happen.
Very much like a servant, you know, the shamash, I guess.
And he's clearing the way.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mashiach. Mashiach is the prophet like Moses from among Moses' brothers, and he's like Moses in that he's the only prophet to ever speak to God face to face, and that he was the most worthy amongst all of us, but yet all of the work that he did was to set us up for success, to be a royal priesthood, to serve, to serve Hashem. And honestly, to serve in the, at least in the millennial kingdom, to serve humanity, to serve, to bring people close, even if it's to teach, not to say just to teach, but like to teach and not necessarily be going through the day-to-day parts of the actual temple service. He's gonna have us go out and serve the people. Serve the goyim at his pleasure, as I've heard it said.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that I've started to do minyan with a local synagogue whenever I can, and you say Kaddish pretty regularly, and it threw me off because at the end, when you say Oseh Shalom Bimramav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, they add V'yoseh or V'yoshvei Tevel, and all those who dwell on the earth. And it threw me off. I was like, what are they saying? I don't see this in the Siddur. What is happening?
Right.
And I looked it up today, and it's he who makes peace for Israel may make peace in the heavenly realms, for all Israel and all those who dwell on the earth. And we say amen. And I was like, I really love this inclusion.
Right.
Not just peace for us, but for everyone that dwells on the earth.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Well, if we're people that believe in conversion, then would that not be the most appropriate prayer? That addition.
And I mean, if his house is a house of prayer for all the nations,
right,
better be everyone that dwells on the earth.
Right. Let's see. Did anybody have any thoughts specific to Aliyah 5? And thank you again, Ben, for reading that. I appreciate it. Before we go to Aliyah 6, does anybody have any thoughts specific to this one? Is Moses out there doing the work, making it happen? Not to make this seem small, but how weird would it be to be all dressed up to do this work, and you're standing there and Moses is doing all of it? You're standing there observing him do everything. If nothing else, maybe it serves as an example.
Yeah.
And that's what I was teaching my son the other day about Mashiach. Is that Mashiach came and he paid our sin debt on the executioner's stake, and he rose again to conquer death, hell, and the grave, so that we might have life eternally for all who believe on him. I said, but that is not the totality of what he came to do. He came to set right the view of what the Torah should look like when it's lived every single day, in space perfection to show us what it is that we're supposed to do, how it is we're supposed to be with our fellow man. So I told him, I said, don't let it be diminished in your hearing or in your mind that this is all that he came for. He said every single day he was here was a part of the reason why he was here. He wasn't just marking time until the crucifixion.
It's Tuesday. I got a couple days left. Let's go fishing.
All right.
It's also that he, like Moses sets an example, and he takes the pattern from heaven on how to build the tent, and then he shows how to clothe the Kohanim and anoint them and anoint the altar. He's like setting an example. And that's why, people question me, like, why do you still follow Yeshua? Like, if you're going to be, Jewish, why aren't you just Jewish by itself? And I'm like, well, I follow Torah because of him, his example. I'm following that tradition. If it weren't for Yeshua, how would I find the Torah?
Right.
So
mine is the same story. Even though growing up in a home with some Torah in it, Mashiach always draws my attention back. Well, he says, "If you love me, you'll keep my commandments," and everything that he ever told us was in the book of Deuteronomy. So I'm assuming that the commandments he wants us to keep is probably some in the Torah. So
I mean, and the more I read them, the more I'm like, oh, this was in the prophets already. Oh, this was in Tehillim already. Oh, this was in Moshe already. Like,
right,
this is not like a completely out of the whole cloth new thing.
Right. I think the
So.
newness of so much of what people see when they look at Mashiach, even with the viewpoint of the Torah, is seeing the way in which he did it. It's not a new commandment, but the way in which he kept it, and the way he made, he did come to save, but he also did come to, divide asunder the so much, even from the bone from the marrow, to be able to make a distinction, not a division as much as to be able to make a distinction, like, this is what I'm rubber stamping. These
Yeah,
things
and
can be done in addition to, but this is the thing that I'm showing you to do.
The way that he really cut to the center of a mitzvah is still just incredibly, just pure wisdom to me. Like, when he's saying, I mean, hey, you guys have heard when Moses is taught you're not supposed to commit adultery, and everyone goes, yeah, we've heard that in the synagogue, every week. And he goes, but I'm saying, if you're looking on someone to lust, you've already done it inside, even if you haven't done it physically. And everyone's like, what? And that's, in the Shema, we're told God is one, and you serve him with all of your heart,
right,
with all of your mind and your strength. So it's your inner man, your rational thought, and your actions. Right. And you can't just be focused on one of them.
Right.
And a lot of us are like, well, I mean, I didn't technically sleep with this person. It's not adultery.
Right.
But that's just your hand. It might not be your brain and your heart. So he's pulling all of those together and going, look, it's your intent also.
Right.
So that's so profound to me. He's reinforcing Torah. He's not pushing it to the side. He's not overwriting it, I guess, to use a computer term.
Right.
Agreed.
Would anybody like to read Aliyah 6 or 6 and 7? Being that we're coming close to our end of our time for this particular time, unless anybody had, instead of just powering through, let's give it its time to breathe. Did anybody have any ideas or thoughts that spring from Aliyah 6 and or 7 that they would like to bring up, if they have notation or thoughts or ideas about any of these words, without us just reading them, but to be able to see anything that stood out to anybody this week regarding them? We obviously have here that, he's going to take the blood of the slaughtered animal and put it on Aaron and his sons' right ear, right thumb, and the big toe of his right foot. Again, pointing back to the idea that, not only should we serve God in these three ways, we should, be careful about where we go, what we allow into our ears, and what we do with our hands. Kind of a dovetail with that same idea that Ms. Deidre was just speaking to. Let's see.
And what we allow to touch us.
Right.
Mhm.
Have to be
You know,
careful.
I think we get all with Passover and unleavened bread coming up. I think we get all consumed about the unleavened bread part, but there's so many times that it's used during these offerings,
Right.
you know, the unleavened bread, and so
And
it,
y'all
it
soft matzah. It's the way to
Yeah.
go.
yeah, but it should be something that I don't know. I think it's noteworthy to see that it's in these sacrifices.
Right.
It's it marks speaks of sinlessness,
Right.
Doing it
Should-
without pride.
you know.
And being, what was it, the chametz swelling up, being like pride, like your
Right.
ego and stuff. And so you offer unleavened bread. So it's like without ego, it's flat because you're being humble.
Right.
And I like that a lot,
I've not thought of that before. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
These words.
And you have to be careful. I've heard it said, and it may be scripture even, to be puffed up with pride is comes often from the counsel of fools.
Sounds like Mishle. Proverbs.
What is that commercial where a legend in our own mind or a legend in our own time?
Yeah.
What is this? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Legend in my own mind.
Oh yeah.
Own mind.
Somebody said this on one of the social media. It's like calling yourself the protagonist of reality. That's how self-centered you are. And I was like, this is exactly how people behave. But how does this affect me, the protagonist of reality?
That's right.
Like, oh my gosh, it's so true.
I like that being trained. I've been trained in the service industry stuff in the past, and a sandbox psychologist. I like reading stuff like that. That they're like, as long as you keep people talking about themselves, and as long as you call them by their name, you can keep them.
Yep, I admit it.
Because, and really, if you think about it, even on the other side of it, most people are not experts on anything except themselves as a subject matter. So that's also true. The one thing that they do know is what goes on in their own brains. So
Well, I have a question. It's kind of at the very end of the Torah portion for this week in verse 35, and I'm just trying to put these places in my mind exactly where they fit. And of course, we've seen the pictures of the Mishkan in the desert and everything, and where the altar was and everything. But it's they're doing all this at the tent of meeting, and this is where Moses and Joshua stayed. So then where was this in conjunction to the Mishkan?
They were outside the camp,
Just like
right? He
or where was
picked
it?
up his tent. He moved outside the camp. The Mishkan was like in the center.
Meeting, like the outer court of the Mishkan?
Well, there's the Mishkan that he built, like the tabernacle that they could transport and move around. But Moses also had like his tent, and they called that the tent of meeting because God would meet him there face to face. But he took that outside the camp. We were actually tripping on that in another group I was studying, and we're like, wait, but the Mishkan was in the middle, and people camped around it. But Moses was staying outside the camp, and I'm like, there's too many
I've never
tents.
picked up on that either. I always just thought it was like, oh, well, he just had like a little tent inside the temple or inside the Mishkan. But it's like, no, the Mishkan's in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. And so the tent of meeting, this is where all this is going on right now at the tent of meeting, right now. I mean, isn't this where this is? They're not. Y'all
Well,
help me
I'm
out here.
wondering
I
if
always thought they were in.
they're
What
doing
about
all the
that?
sacrifices and
Well, it
stuff
says
at the Mishkan.
they are doing
Yeah.
2 days.
But I'm wondering, like, if
Huh?
after the Mishkan's set up and anointed and sprinkled and all that good stuff, if they're not like, all right, we're going to hang out here in
We
seclusion.
should probably read through this last part then, because that Bridget's bringing that up. I think that's probably really important.
Well, let's do it. Aliyah
Do it.
7, Leviticus chapter 8, verse 30. I'll go ahead and kick it. And Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood that was on the altar, and he sprinkled it on Aaron and on his garments and on his sons' garments, and he sanctified Aaron, his garments, his sons, and his sons' garments with him. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons, cook the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting and eat it there. And the bread that is in the basket of the investiture offerings, as I have commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. And whatever is left over from the flesh and the bread, you shall burn it in fire. You shall burn in fire. So it's not necessarily saying the fire that's on the altar at that moment. And you shall not leave the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days until the day of completion of your investiture days. He will inaugurate you for 7 days. As he did on this day, so the Lord has commanded to do, to effect atonement for you. And you shall stay day and night for 7 days at the entrance of the tent of meeting. You shall observe the Lord's command, so that you will not die, for thus I was commanded. And Aaron and his sons did all the things that the Lord commanded through Moses.
Okay, so see there, that tells you all this is going right there, going on right at the tent of meeting.
Right.
Oh, hell, Moed.
You know, am I reading this correct? That
Now, yes, I'll be honest with you. I've never considered the tent of meeting and the Mishkan as 2 different places, but that does make sense.
right?
It's
Because
Exodus 33:7, I think is what she was talking about.
Yeah, he picked it up and moved it. Some commentators are saying he did it because of the golden calf. He was like, that's it. I can't stay in the middle here. You guys not. But whatever his reason, he moved it outside the camp. I think it says some distance away. So I'm like, how far out was that? And there was a pillar of cloud. So I'm like, ooh, buddy. It's powerful.
I don't know. It just seems like that. I was teaching a class about something about this, and I thought, hey, it never occurred to me that these were 2 different places.
right.
Yeah, I actually had that revelation last week.
Yeah,
I was reading some of this.
One, like,
I was like, yeah, that's totally the same thing. And then, yeah, I read this and I'm like, oh, wait. Oh, no, I wasn't even paying attention.
right, because you just
Oh.
after all this instructions about the tabernacle and the Mishkan and all this, that's where the tent of meeting was.
Well, I always thought it was too.
But it's not.
Yeah, they're 2
Yeah.
different places. It looks like they did all the stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe Moses' tent is the tent of meeting wherever it happens to be. And we know that it moved outside for some period of time or at some period of time. But do we have reference that it was always outside?
At first, no.
Right.
Towards the end of Exodus, he was like, boop. I think that's interesting too. If you want to get up on the remez or the drash level, maybe that being within the congregation could have a meaning about being in the land specifically, whereas outside the camp could have a parallel to being outside the land, referring to exile. So when you're told, later on by Rashol and Kefa that you're priests, but they were speaking to exiles, maybe they're discussing a parallel to the fact that the priests were inaugurated, I think is the word Chabad uses. They were consecrated, anointed, set apart, and inaugurated outside the camp before they initiated their service inside the whole community. There could be a connection there. Haven't had time to chew on it, but
It definitely makes sense because I always envisioned the outer court as being the tent of meeting. And I was thinking, well, if but people can't just willy-nilly go in there.
Right.
So I've always been thinking the reason why they're doing it in the eyes of the people is because literally they're spending an entire week sitting in the entryway to the tent, to what I was thinking was the opening to the Mishkan. So I'm like, that's not a lot of room to move around. Like
Right.
just in the open, wherever the opening is where people come to bring their animals. So it actually makes a little more sense. They would like
Right.
be in the tent of meeting, probably hanging out with Moses, in and out, but people could come, view them, discuss them, question them, maybe even like Mashiach, talked about when he was a child or even as an adult life, where he was questioned, like they would be there at a place where people would actually access them.
is Yithro was before this, right?
Yes.
Where Jethro's like, you're doing way too much, guy. You got to appoint
Right.
people to handle some of the stuff.
Right.
Because I know that he would sit down and people would bring their questions and their rulings and stuff to him, and he would answer them. And if the people that are being consecrated are sitting there for a week, there is high likelihood that he's training them and teaching them what to do and how to do it, and they're kind of getting that education and learning while they're there before they go and start
Right.
the whole thing.
Because ultimately they're going to be the ones that have to stand in judgment on a lot of this stuff and be a high court, as it were. And they're also going to have to be the ones to assess people's illnesses and
Yeah.
So,
Here's what to look for.
right. When the priest is also the doctor.
Yeah.
Scripture, it also it says that Moses would sit at the front of the tent of meeting, but
Right.
Joshua never came out.
Right. That he just lived
Joshua
there.
never comes out of the tent of meeting.
Right.
So I mean, that to me is all a lot of messianic overtones, of course.
Right.
But I just think there's something to it that I think it's the elephant in the room that we didn't see.
Yeah.
No, that's
I've had
actually
some
I'm
moments with that.
looking forward to the rest of this Parsha cycle now.
Yeah, and just see when
Yeah.
that
Consider the difference between the courtyard, the tent of meeting versus the actual Mishkan itself. That's going to make for different reading.
I love that he goes out where the people are, like past their encampments. They have to walk through the different, groupings of people to get outside. So they're seeing you leave being, not consecrated yet. You're just, you're a Kohen, and you come back after the week and it's like, all right, you're bona fide now, you're official. And they go in and they start doing the work, and the people get to see that, you come out, go in, and it's probably an interesting transformation for them to watch.
Right. It's like getting your certification and everything.
Because when Moses, I do remember that, Ben, when you were talking about Exodus, it says when they would see Moses get up to go in the tent, they would stand up until he walked in, and then they, would sit down, and that's when the pillar would come down. So.
Yeah, Ben, thanks very much for sure. Anybody, what has been shared with us is a link, and I'm sure we'll all be edified from it. I'll share it with you all. It's gotquestions.org/tent-of-meeting.html. And I'll put that in the link in the description to the video as well. But thank you all so much for
an answer, not necessarily the answer.
Well, we're people of the multiple answers around these parts. So the joys and the journey. But thank you, all of you who've hung out with us and attended this Midrash with us for another week. Thank you so much for visiting with us. We hope that this blesses you in perpetuity. And as always, if you would like to reach out to us, you can. You reach us through the comment section of this YouTube video. They will be open and there for you to interact with us. If you'd like to continue the conversation further, you can go to facebook.com/Yoke groups/Yoke of Messiah. And if you would like to reach me directly, you can at yokeofmessiah@gmail.com. Thank you again so much for visiting with us. It's been our privilege, and we hope that it's been your blessing. Shalom Aleichem.